Hi there, my name is Zach. I'm the founder and CEO of ZJC Worship, as well as the Associate Pastor of Worship at First Baptist Church Lancaster in Lancaster, Ohio. In my experience building relationships with other pastors here in Ohio, I can testify to a massive need for worship musicians in churches everywhere you look. So when I was in school, many people in my sphere, my parents, even some of professors, there's this prediction that there'd be a lot of worship leaders, a lot of worship musicians. There'd be a glut in churches by the time that I went into full-time worship ministry. And really the opposite has happened. Increasingly, pastors are struggling to find worship leaders, let alone filling out a worship team. I serve in a Southern Baptist church, and man, I hear this all the time. I saw it when I was guest leading worship. I see it now when I'm full-time and we're building relationships with other churches across the state. You know, I just heard Dwayne Moore with Next Level Worship talking about the need in Colorado. I mean, this is everywhere. Bottom line, there are significant needs. When we talk in Scripture about singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs together as a church, it's commanded in Scripture. It's not an optional part of the church gathering. So whatever role you're in your church, or maybe that you want to be, the role that God has called you to, it's vital, it's important, and it's needed in the church today. And why would that be? When there's no one to serve the church by leading worship skillfully and worshipfully, the mission of the church suffers. Poorly executed worship ministry and a lack of worship engagement, it becomes a barrier to the gospel. And we don't want that. Obviously, we really don't want that. And I'm convinced that churches need to develop musicians who love Jesus and lead others in worship. But importantly, we don't just want to be poaching musicians from other sister churches. We need to be developing new musicians. We need to create cultures where that becomes normal. But doing that requires significant time and resources. And honestly, it's far beyond what most pastors can do. And that's where ZJC Worship is designed to come in. That's where we come to help meet that need. The mission of ZJC Worship is to help worship musicians go from practice to platform, which helps churches advance the gospel of Jesus Christ, all to the glory of God. You know, I've taken over 20 years of experience serving on worship teams and learning all these instruments, and I've created worship pipelines. They're curated to help worship musicians take an efficient path to train the skills needed for each major worship role. These are all roles that I've served in for really over 20 years, depending on the instrument, around 18 to 22 years. And this is designed to help worship musicians go from practice to platform and get to their first audition quickly without sacrificing the preparation necessary for them to excel in their role. Let me ask you, do you resonate with any of these questions that I'm about to ask? If you can answer yes, then ZJC Worship might help meet a need for you. So let me ask you, do you feel God prompting you, maybe tugging at your heart to learn a worship role and serve on a worship team? I mean, I remember God calling me to this, and He gave me the dream and the drive to pursue it. Are you a veteran on one instrument, but you're wanting to expand your tool belt? I mean, that's really my story. I started on piano in 2nd grade and then drums in 6th grade. And then when I felt God leading me to pursue worship ministry as a freshman in high school, God just gave me this drive to learn these different guitars, acoustic, electric, and bass guitar, and to take it from there. Maybe you want to go from being an instrumentalist to a worship leader, but you don't know how to lead people, or maybe singing is hard for you. I mean, I know all about that. It took time and hard work and patience, but God led me through it, and I know He can do the same for you. No matter your situation, ZJC Worship will help you grow in your craft and your effectiveness in worship ministry. But let's flip it around. Maybe you're a worship pastor or a worship leader, and you're struggling to find a drummer or an electric guitarist or a pianist. Maybe your keys player moved away. What if you had a tool that you could recommend or buy for someone who is interested in learning an instrument? Or maybe you have someone who, maybe, let's be honest, they had an audition and it didn't go so well. What if you had a resource that instead of just giving a flat no, that you could say, hey, I see potential in you, but for you to realize that potential, I really would like for you to go through a ZJC Worship course to help you prepare for your next audition so that you succeed. What about this? Maybe you run a gospel-focused organization like pastoring a church. Maybe you're a Christian school teacher or a principal or administrator. Maybe you're a music teacher, or you're even a college or a seminary professor. What if I told you that I could give you like a huge chunk of students access to high quality worship training at just a fraction of the cost? It's crazy what we can do. And with ZJC Worship, it's possible to provide worship training for thousands of students for pennies on the dollar. So if you're interested in that, we've got group plans that potentially could help. But don't take my word for it. Here are some testimonials from people who've tried ZJC Worship courses and are really excited about it. So Dwayne Moore from Next Level Worship says, we're excited to partner with ZJC Worship to help us train up worship leaders in Africa. Your online courses are a tremendous resource for Christian musicians and church leaders in the U.S. and abroad. Your excellent and thorough courses will help us fill a great need for teaching those in our international sponsorship program. Thanks, Dwayne. Mark Elliott from Spring Hills Baptist Church. Having resources right in your town aren't always possible when it comes to learning an instrument. Then if they are, the financial cost can become a burden. Zach James Creative was our answer to helping our son and many other students have all that they needed at their fingertips to learn and grow. Having this type of depth of knowledge available to everyone is a tremendous gift. And then Cody Towell, I've learned so much by following the progression of the courses. If you're on the fence about looking into these worship courses, I would encourage you to just go for it and jump off the fence. At the end of the day, it boils down to this. ZJC Worship can help you get musicians into the pipeline faster and help your existing musicians become ideal worship team members that you will love to schedule week to week. ZJC Worship is a proud partner with Next Level Worship International to provide worship training to students as part of the Next Level Worship Intensive Schools. I'll also be participating in the Next Level Worship sponsorship program this winter and spring, mentoring a worship leader from Africa this year. I'm incredibly excited about it. Dwayne Moore, the founder and president of Next Level Worship, has this to say about ZJC Worships. Take a look.
Utilized Zach's training videos with about 200 of our international students last year who attended our intensive leadership schools in Africa. They were a great way for us to continue investing in those worship leaders after we left. Zach's videos are highly effective and thorough, and we've gotten good response from those who went through them. Next Level Worship International looks forward to continuing our partnership with ZJC Worship.
So what should you expect when you take a ZJC Worship course? Well, there are three main things to keep in mind that you can expect when you take a course. First, each course includes easy to follow videos with multi-angle, professional tier video that can be slowed down to half speed, along with detailed notes so that you can follow along. You can even use these notes with something like a Google Chrome translation if you speak a different language, potentially. Every course trains your brain via fun, repeatable quizzes, critical thinking questions, practice exercises, and recording prompts to develop your musical mind. And then third, every course is comprehensively curated to guide you through the most important advanced techniques that you need in worship ministry. As a worship pastor, these are the things that I want to see when someone comes in to audition for me, and the things that I would consider for an ideal team member. So you know that when you're going through a course that this is designed to prepare you for worship ministry. So how do I get started? Well, we try to give you a variety of options to suit your interests and budget. So if you're ready to get started, the first step is to go to ZJC, that's ZJCWorship.com. If you're interested in one course, go ahead and buy the course for $79. To do this, go to ZJCWorship.com, scroll down to the course and tap it, or you can find it up in the header menu, and then click Buy Course and complete checkout. You'll receive email instructions to get started immediately, so you don't have to wait. If you're interested in multiple courses, you could buy them individually. There is a bundle that reduces the price if you get all of the courses, and there's no subscription with that. I believe that's $2.99. But a subscription might be a better choice. We recommend either a core for $9.99 a month, or premium for $19.99 a month. Core gives you all 8 courses, but premium gives you the 8 courses plus access to feedback as you go through the courses. There's also some nice bonuses and workshops. There's some pads in there that you can use for tracks. There's some workshops from Worship 424 in the past that you would get access to as well. If you're just wanting to dip your toes in the water, a starter subscription for $3.99 a month will also give you access to Module 1. I should say it will just give you access to Module 1. Just keep in mind that your progress, if you go with Starter, it won't transfer to the full courses. It's a separate product. Are you ready to learn a new worship role at your church? Well, we'll help you go from practice to platform with these free introductory webinars from ZJC Worship. So on February 22nd, we're planning for piano. March 22nd will be acoustic. April 12th will be bass. August 23rd will be drums. October 18th will be electric. November 15th will be vocals. So all webinars are scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dates and times may be subject to change depending on the circumstances, how the year plays out. You can subscribe to our email list for updates at zjcworship.com, or even better, you can register now at zjcworship.com/webinars. So if you go to zjcworship.com/webinars, there's a link to sign up for each of the webinars that you are interested in. These are totally free. They're designed to help you get started with a worship role and give you a path to get started. So hope you check those out, and we'll see you on those dates. So by the end of the acoustic course, you'll know all of this. You'll know over 100 chords, inversions, and variations across 8 content-rich modules, plus an intro and final exams. Best practices for keys of G, D, C, E, and A, as well as how to transpose, how to access any key with a capo, how to bar chords, and acceptable substitutes for difficult chords. And then you'll learn 3 alternate tunings unique to my style of worship leading for a better sound and easier chording. It's very likely you won't find these anywhere else. And there's much more. So for example, in Module 1, here's just a quick overview of what we'll cover. So in Module 1, we'll learn our first 2 chords. We'll learn how to quickly read and interpret guitar chords in tab or tablature. We'll learn what notes to tune to in standard tuning. We'll learn proper fretting technique so you can get a clean sound. We'll learn G and C chords in standard tuning, and then basic diamond strumming patterns and how to simplify to self-teach strumming. And then there's bonus for advanced players as we go along. So there are G and C chords in my favorite alternate tuning, Lazy D, and we'll follow that along the rest of the course. Module 2, there are 3 more chords in the key of G. So the other 3 chords that we need to play most worship songs in the key of G are E minor, D, and A minor. And I'll show you some practical shortcut chords that will help you get functional faster while improving your sound. And we'll talk about simple strumming patterns, primarily using down strumming, but to get you into the idea of strumming. And for advanced players, we'll cover E minor, D, and A minor chords in Lazy D, my favorite alternate tuning. In Module 3, we'll learn another key. We'll learn the chords used in the key of D, A, B minor, and G. And then we'll learn some useful substitute and shortcut chords in the key of D so that you get functional faster. We'll learn A sus, B minor 7, G2. And what's really important about this is I'm going to help show you the efficient path, the most useful shortcuts. I want you to be able to play complicated chords and all of that, but when you're starting out, I want to get you functional as quickly as possible. We'll learn how to transition between chords smoothly. We'll increase the strumming pattern difficulty, and for advanced players, we'll cover chords in the key of D and Lazy D. In Module 4, we start to switch. We think about keys and capos and transposing. So you'll learn how to find notes on specific frets on the guitar. We'll learn what keys are, how they work. We'll learn how to use capos to access any key easily using chords in the key of G or D. We'll learn how to transpose chord charts between keys. We'll develop the ability to do it on the fly mentally. And then we'll add F and D minor chords in standard tuning so that we can also play in the key of C now. And then we'll learn some useful shortcut chords for F and D minor, particularly F major 7 and a D minor 7, to make it much easier to play these chords. And then as a bonus, we'll talk about why you wouldn't use certain chords, such as F or D minor in lazy D, why you would tailor your strategy around not using those chords. Module 5 will cover essential chord variations, the most common inversions that you'll see in the key of G, D, and C. We'll talk about common chord variants in the key of G, D, and C, and this is where your chord library is going to increase dramatically. So there's a large chord library full of practical voicings and options that maybe you haven't seen before. These are things I've developed over time that I've discovered, and these are recommended voicings to use when there are chords with multiple options. On acoustic guitar in particular, sometimes the default chord that you find in a guitar chord book is not the best choice. And so we'll learn how to know which specific chord voicings to use. And then for advanced players, we'll get into a bunch of common chord variations in the keys of G, D, and C using lazy D tuning. In Module 6, this is where we start to transition into how we play on a team. So Module 6 covers things like how to play acoustic and excel in a worship team setting, what to listen for. We'll talk about how to know when less is more in terms of how much you play, and when you need to guide the rhythm of your team. We'll talk about how to vary strumming patterns for dynamics and creative effect. We'll talk about how to play with a click track, special techniques such as palm muting and finger picking. And then for advanced players, we get into some really cool chords in lazy D. This starts to get into the reason why I love lazy D. These are beautiful, useful chords that you can use to be creative, higher on the neck in lazy D. In Module 7, we'll get creative. We'll talk about playing in the key of E, and there's a bunch of beautiful chord options in the key of E. We'll learn how to play with the open D tuning. This is a warm, alternate tuning and has a ton of beautiful chord voicings and inversions. It's awesome. If you've never tried open D, you really got to try it. Finger picking, classical guitar techniques in open D that are ideal for solo acoustic. We'll talk about how to use multiple acoustics in a team. How do you avoid the dreaded wall of sound effect when you have multiple guitars? And then for advanced players, we'll talk about alternate chord voicings and counter melody options higher up the neck in the key of D. And in Module 8, we'll get into advanced techniques, so how to play in drop top C, alternate tuning. So this is using C-formed chords, but it will give you kind of a pseudo 12-string sound. It has options high on the neck. It's a fun, it's kind of a niche tuning, but it can be useful in certain songs and situations. We'll talk about bluegrass strumming patterns. These are more advanced strumming patterns that are useful for songs. If you like Rend Collective, All Sons and Daughters, Shane and Shane, there are songs that show up that use these strumming patterns. We'll talk about how to play with a kick, like a kick drum, while leading from acoustic, and develop competency, even if you don't play drums. This is something you can learn. And then we'll talk about the mental strategy of how you execute on a high level by automating certain aspects of your playing so you can focus on what's really important. And this has been a real key for me over the years, learning this piece. If you learn this early, it will really help you come through under pressure. So that's an overview, and then from there you take the final exam and you're done. So that is the acoustic course. So the bass course. By the end of this course, you'll know right and left hand technique, as well as all notes on bass, as well as transposing and inversions. You'll know how to operate on bass in a worship team setting. I recently got to play bass for the State Convention of Baptists in Ohio during the annual meeting. And these are things, the things that are in the course are the things that I use to try and be the ideal team member in that setting. These are special tricks to create dynamics from the bass. Tips and tricks for bassists looking to get creative, including an introduction to bass fills and examples, and there's much more. So Module 1 covers 2 notes and 1 song. So we'll learn standard tuning for a 4-string bass. We'll cover essential left and right hand technique on bass. We'll learn how to find notes via specific frets. and how to play G and C notes on E and A strings. And this is going to start out slow. The good news is bass has a faster ramp-up time than a lot of other instruments. So if you've struggled to learn acoustic, for example, bass can be a great option because of that. Module 2, 3 more notes, 1 full key. We'll talk about how to interpret chords that you see on chord charts. Bassists have to think about it a little bit differently. The other 3 notes that you need to play in most songs in the key of G, so that would be E, D, and A, and how to mute strings when we're not playing them. This is very important for bass. And then how to pluck with your second finger, so then we start to add that second finger in there. Module 3, we'll add 2 more keys. We'll learn the other notes that you need to play in the keys of D and C, and how to start alternating fingers. And importantly, to do this, we'll learn what sharps and flats are, as well as how to find what would be on piano. We call them black key notes on bass. So these are your sharps and your flats. Module 4 covers keys, scales, and transposing. So we'll learn how to play all the other notes on bass guitar, adding all the rest of the sharps and flats we haven't covered. We'll learn keys, scales, and how they function on bass. We'll learn major scales and patterns that are used in scales, so you can find a major scale even if you don't know the notes of that scale. You know, if you're playing in D flat, if you know the pattern, even though D flat has lots of flats in the key, it's a lot of times harder to remember than a C scale, for example. For most people, that's true. If you know the pattern for a major scale, you can find where the notes are even if you're not quite sure what the notes are. We'll talk about how to transpose between keys, and eventually we'll learn to do it mentally on the fly. Talk about Module 5 then, inversions and rhythm. So we'll talk about the most commonly used inversions in the keys of G, D, and C. And this is to show you 3 examples of how this works. Inversions on bass are absolutely vital. The bassists play as the lowest instrument, and we'll talk about that, why that is so important. We'll talk about how to read rhythm notation so that you can understand bass rhythms more easily. We'll talk about increasing difficulty on alternate finger plucking patterns and how you can add complexity to your plucking. Module 6, playing in a worship team setting. How to play bass in a worship team setting. How to make your team sound cleaner using the principle less is more. A lot of times when I was playing at the state convention annual meeting, I would be playing one note and holding it because they had the bass cranked. And this is something that really can help clean up your team's sound if you keep it simple. And we'll talk about how to play with dynamics, talk about how to play with a click track. Module 7, we'll start to get a little more creative, so plucking different parts of the string for a different sound. We'll learn how to use this to enhance your team's dynamics, how to slide to notes, how to play grace notes with kind of a riff to practice, muting strings, but you can still pluck them for rhythm. Sometimes there are certain songs where it's really useful. And this is really cool that I don't want you to miss. Using the higher parts of the bass can really, really enhance your team's sound. And that's what this module will cover, one of the things. Module 8 is advanced techniques, so how to play hammer-ons and pull-offs to play more complicated riffs, an introduction to bass fills and when to use them, how to automate certain mental aspects so you can focus on worshiping. Again, this is a really key thing. Once I learned this, it helped me execute more under pressure to the glory of God. Keys to self-teaching beyond this course, how to start to learn to be a self-teacher even as you continue to be open to learning. So that is the bass course. So the vocal course. By the end of this course, you'll know how to unlock your voice to sing with power and authority. We'll talk about the fundamentals of vocal technique, made simple, easy to understand, such as breathing, dynamics, diction, pitch, etc. In-depth demonstrations of good and bad technique so that you can apply concepts and self-teach. So you'll hear me do concepts well and hear me intentionally do them suboptimally and point it out so that you can see examples of that. And then we'll talk about advanced tips for tight harmonies, killer vocal trios, engaging stage presence, effective leadership, and deep spiritual maturity as a vocalist. So Module 1 will cover warm-ups and eliminating tension. We'll talk about beginning vocal posture, why we want to eliminate tension to avoid long-term injury. why warm-ups can make or break your voice, that is absolutely my story. Finding the specific vocal warm-ups made a massive difference in me being actually able to serve in full-time worship ministry. And we'll talk about how to get the most from imitating other artists and how to use that to accelerate your learning as a vocalist. And then as a bonus, I'll show you the unique warm-ups I use. I think you should be careful when you try them, but I've developed them and they've worked really well for my voice. Module 2, we'll talk about breathing and pitch and how to get proper breath support for maximum sustainability. We'll talk about how to strategically choose your breathing by understanding phrases. We'll talk about how to mentally approach singing on pitch and how to develop an ear to hear when you're flat or sharp and make the adjustment. Module 3 will be powering up, so the importance of keeping an open mouth in vocals, tips to get a powerful sound if you can't open your mouth wide, which is me. I've had mild kind of TMJ, so if you're in my circumstance, it will help to, how do you overcome that? Where do we place the sound in our face so that it feels easy and resonates freely? What should our tongue be doing so we don't hinder our vocal sound? And then, this is really key, how do we use our core to sing with maximum strength? Module 4 will cover diction, vowels, and keeping time. So we'll talk about how to shape our sound with our diction, how we use vocal vowels and consonants for different purposes vocally, how we sing in the pocket rhythmically, how to help our band keep time when singing, especially with a click track. And then Module 5, we'll talk about advanced vocal techniques. So how to use vibrato tastefully to give our vocal sound extra sustain and freedom. We'll talk about how to control vibrato so it doesn't overpower our sound, the power of dynamics and how to access the extremes of your voice, best practices for head voice, male and female, and how to use the microphone as part of your instrument to unlock your voice. This was another key thing for me. Module 6, we'll talk about harmony. We'll talk about an introduction to how harmony works, how to find it, tips to find the low or the tenor harmony by ear, tips to find the high or the alto harmony by ear, and we'll talk about 2-part versus 3-part harmony and how it changes the options we have for parts in worship music. Module 7, we'll talk about tips for vocal trios, so a bunch of tips to get killer vocal trios, including tips on blending, listening, dynamics, breathing, and more. We'll talk about the things pros are listening for when they put a vocal trio together, and how to workshop a vocal trio to get maximum impact and a unified sound. And then Module 8, we'll talk about stage presence and authority. So how your stage presence can make a massive difference in how people respond in worship. This is really, really, really huge. And we'll talk about the importance of memorization, getting away from music stands. As a vocalist, you need to do it. Strategies to begin developing the ability to tastefully ad-lib without distracting in worship, and the importance of rejecting jealousy and being a spiritually healthy team member as a vocalist. And the reason I put this in here is because this, for whatever reason, with vocalists can be a bigger issue from experience, and we want to put that to death. We want to be kingdom-minded team members who love Jesus and love our team, even if that means someone, ultimately we're about glorifying God, so if someone becomes greater, that doesn't matter, because we want God to be glorified. So that's the vocal course. So the piano course. By the end of this course, you'll know the essentials of piano technique, how to play in every key, all major and minor chords, including special tips and shortcuts, chord variants and inversions, typically seen in worship music, best practices to get a professional and tasteful worship sound, advanced tips on how piano works as a rhythm or a lead instrument on a worship team, and much more. So Module 1 covers 2 scales and our first key. So how do we find specific notes on piano? We'll talk about playing C and G scales. We'll talk about what intervals are and why they matter. We'll show chords used in the key of G. We'll talk about pads versus piano and how you can use pads as a new pianist to get functional faster. It makes a big difference in how you can be usable on a team much more quickly. We'll talk about 1-5 and 1-5-1 patterns, again, to get you functional quickly, and how to play basic rhythm called diamonds. Module 2 will cover more keys. We'll talk about how to play chords used in the keys of C, D, and E. We'll talk about best options for our left hand with the bass note and how to play more rhythmic patterns. Module 3 will cover white keys and all standard chords, so we'll talk about how to use the pedal. We'll talk about how to play all of the remaining white key scales and chords, and how to play all major and minor chords. Module 4 will cover scales, keys, and inversions, so how we play scales and chords in the remaining black note keys, how to transpose chord charts to a different key, and how to play chord inversions in every key. Module 5 will talk about chord variants, so how to play common chord variants in every key, including how to play sus2 chords, sus4 chords, how to play 7th chords, major and minor, and which ones typically show up in worship music. This isn't a jazz chord library, this is a worship chord library, so it's focused on the most important essential variations. Module 6, piano as a rhythm instrument. So how you play piano as a rhythm instrument in a worship team setting. We'll talk about best practices for killer chord voicings, talk about how to play with a click track or metronome, how to accomplish more by playing less, and we'll talk about common rhythm patterns, feels for rhythm piano, and strategies. Module 7 covers piano as a lead instrument, so we'll talk about how to use piano as a lead instrument, how to play around vocals and listen to your team, and how we create iconic hooks from the keyboard. And then Module 8 will get into more advanced techniques, advanced lead piano techniques, tips for playing lead synth, how to use effects such as reverb, delay, and compression on keys, mental techniques to overcome nerves and play better live, and then some strategies for gear, including how to make do when you're on a budget. So there's a ton packed into this course. This is one of the largest courses. So when you hear all of these things, keep in mind there is a lot of material to cover just by the nature of what piano is. Piano takes, I would say, to reach the point, because you're not using a capo, to reach the point where you fully understand and are able to play in every key, it can take longer than some other instruments, but it is worth it. It is what I call the gateway instrument. You learn this instrument, especially you learn it early, and it will unlock your ability to understand what's happening on virtually any other instrument, maybe except for drums, because it's much more rhythmically based, but it will still help you. So even if you play acoustic guitar, learning piano is to your benefit as a worship musician, and I would strongly encourage you to check out this course. So the drum course. By the end of this course, you'll know how drums can be broken down into very simple components, making this easier to learn than you might think. The essentials of stick control, foot control, and rhythm, how to count rhythms, time signatures, and break down a beat so that you can learn beats by ear, many common beats progressing from very simple beats to complex beats, how to play with dynamics and lead your team from the drums through the map of songs, and advanced tips such as playing in compound time signatures, best practices for multi-drummer setups, and more. So Module 1 will cover learning control in our first beat. So we'll talk about basic stick and foot technique, counting rhythm, playing with a metronome. We'll talk about subdivisions, downbeats, and time signatures. We'll cover stick control techniques, warm-ups, essential rudiments, things that I've found to be really helpful, things I use in my own warm-ups when I'm playing drums, and we'll learn our first beat in this first module. Module 2, we'll talk about rudiments and 4/4 beats. So the essential rudiments, we'll dig into this a little bit more for worship. Core beats that are common in 4/4, double hit variations on beats using kick and snare, so that you start to see how you add variations to existing beats, and that's how you add complexity. How to add your own variations to beats. And then Module 3 will cover double beats and fills. So how to play double hand hi-hat snare beats in 4/4. Cover tom beats in 4/4. We'll cover snare roll beats in 4/4. Why we use drum fills, and then common drum fills in 4/4. Module 4 will cover 2 more time signatures, so we'll start to count in 6/8. We'll count in 3/4. And we'll show common beats, variations, and fills in 6/8 and 3/4 time signatures. Module 5 will cover dynamics and emotion, so the vital importance of dynamics on drums, And we'll talk about the drum kit and how our decisions on which drum to use or which type of beat affects the energy, the dynamic level of the song. And this is one of the secret sauce things to amazing drummers, is knowing which tools in the kit to use to create the right dynamic. We'll talk about common pitfalls and effective techniques, and then how to build effectively from 0 to 100%, let's say through a bridge or a couple choruses that are building. Module 6, we'll talk about playing in a worship team setting, practical tips to help you excel on drums in a worship team setting, the servant-hearted approach to worship teams. Again, less is more. Thinking through this as a drummer, what does this look like? We'll talk about playing in the pocket with a click track and how to prepare your next set with a professional mindset as a drummer. Module 7, we'll start to cover some trickier beats and fills, so we'll talk about advanced time signatures. We'll talk about playing in 12/8 time signature using triplets. Occasionally shows up in worship songs. We'll talk about playing in 7/4 or other compound time signatures such as 4/4 and 3/4. Again, it's less common, but it does show up occasionally. Other advanced beats and fills. And we'll talk about rim shots and kind of more technical beats, so things you can use to create unique sounds. And in Module 8, we'll talk about advanced techniques, so how to play boldly with confidence and authority, so moving into a spot where you are leading as a drummer. That's one of the most important things that I was told early as a very young, very green drummer, is you are essentially the leader. Even though you're serving underneath the leadership of the worship leader, if you're loud, it doesn't matter what the worship leader wants to do. So you and the worship leader have to be on the same page, and then you have to learn how to confidently lead the team dynamically, even as you're serving under the authority of the worship leader. We'll talk about an introduction to drum solos, when to use them, how to automate certain mental aspects of drumming so you can focus on worshiping from the heart, acoustic versus electric kits and when to use them, and keys to self-teaching effectively beyond this course so that you can launch from this course into being able to figure out beats when you hear them on MP3s. So with all of that being said, this is the drum course. So the electric course. Let me preface this by saying that ideally by the time you enter this course, you have gone through the acoustic course and potentially the music theory course. There are a lot of things with electric guitar that really benefit from having a solid rhythm guitar and music theory foundation. You don't have to, but it will help you. By the end of this course, you'll know how to play rhythm, including power chords, high lead rhythm shapes, and bar chords. I got the opportunity to play at Refuel Conference with the Liberty Church Network at Sycamore Creek Church this last year, and it was a blast. And I used a lot of these techniques when I was playing for that conference. We'll talk about learning strategies to quickly identify notes across the entire fretboard, highly useful scale patterns, intervals, and lead positions for all strings and keys. We'll talk about common guitar movements such as vibrato, bending, and more. How to use music theory to create memorable, iconic lead parts. How to serve your team, how to play around vocals and become a lead player that your worship leader loves to have on the team, and much more. So, specific modules. Module 1 is rhythm electric. So we talk about how to use acoustic rhythm chords on electric, but there's better ways to do this. So we talk about how to play power chords all over the guitar, but even better, how to play insanely useful high rhythm chords for electric. This is so huge that even as you're making the transition from acoustic to electric, from rhythm to lead, these are going to be higher chord shapes that will help you feel more like a lead player, even maybe as you're still getting this lead thing down. And we'll talk about how to play bar chords and why I do encourage you with electric guitar not to use a capo unless there's a specific sound that you need that you can only achieve with a capo. Module 2, scales, keys, and anchors. So we'll talk about how scales and keys work with lead guitar. We'll talk about how to play individual notes on every string of the guitar. We'll talk about how to use anchor notes to memorize the neck as you're learning this and how to create mental anchors on the guitar. How to play notes and scales used in every key on lead guitar. and how to start creating your own lead parts using just one note at a time. Module 3 will cover scale patterns and lead positions, so how to play multi-string scale patterns on each string. We'll talk about essential lead guitar positions, the places on the neck, common positions by which you can kind of stay in one place and create an interesting lead part, and it lets you simplify the process of figuring out a lead part. We'll talk about how to play beginning 2-note rhythm patterns that are common to lead guitar. Module 4 will talk about movement and chord interactions, so common techniques and movements around the guitar, such as sliding, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and more. And we'll have a detailed analysis of the interactions with common worship chords and major scale degrees. This is so key. This is key to creating your own lead parts. If you understand this, if you spend time with this module, you will all of a sudden realize the system of music and how scale degrees and chords interact, and that will help you learn how to create emotion appropriate to the song. And we'll talk about how to create iconic lead parts, only using single notes, just one note at a time. In the Module 5, we'll cover thirds, sixths, and octaves. These are the most, I would say, useful intervals in my experience to make lead parts sound amazing. So we'll talk about how to use these intervals in music theory to do just that. We'll cover thirds on the D, G, B, and E strings in every key, all the way up the neck, sixths for the same, all the way up the neck, and octaves, all the way up the neck. And octaves, unbelievably useful on lead guitar. I'm so excited if you take this. There's so much in this course that is has been so useful for me as a rhythm and a lead player. Module 6, playing in a worship team setting. So how to play electric in a worship team setting, how to create hooks, flavor, and ambience while you're playing around vocals, how to make your team sound better by following the principle less is more. Again, these are all things that I used when I was playing for Refuel at the Liberty Church Network conference, and it's going to help you. How to play around vocals in 3 ways that you can serve the melody of the song, how to play with a click track, how to create iconic hooks that gel with your team and style, and then how to enhance your team's dynamics and help your congregation engage in worship. Electric guitar has a very unique place on the team, and if you embrace that and you understand how you can do that, your team will love you for doing it. Module 7, get the most from your gear. So this is not a buying guide. This is not a high-end gear tutorial. This is geared for newer electric players trying to get a quality, worshipful sound while on a budget. You'll see me using Mainstage with a pretty relatively cheap gear to try and get a decent sound with that, to encourage you that it is possible. We'll talk about how to get the most out of your gear, tips to create a solid guitar sound, how to use special effects like EQ, distortion, delay, reverb, and compression, and yes, as an electric player, you should be using these effects. Module 8, we'll talk about advanced techniques, so how to play swells, how to pull off mandolin style tremolo picking, like, you know, if you've heard this on albums all the time. How to start learning to solo, how to begin leading worship from electric guitar and playing lead parts while you sing. That's something I've learned to do, and I can help you understand mentally what needs to happen for that to take place. And along that line, how to automate certain mental aspects of the music so that you can focus on what's most important in the situation. It's super vital, and it's really, really important if you're leading worship from electric guitar. So that is the electric course. So the music theory and ear training course, I love this course. This is, music theory is not boring for me. It is exciting. It is the system of music, and especially in worship music. When you understand this, if you take this course, this is the secret sauce. This will help you learn any other instrument. So if you put in the time, it will help you. I guarantee. This was something my piano teacher taught music theory to me, and it enabled me to learn other instruments. So by the end of this course, you'll know how to use music theory to become a confident worship musician. You'll learn the Nashville number system and how it makes music make sense. It won't feel arbitrary when you're done with this course. You'll understand, oh, this is why it functions this way. It's amazing what God has done with music. We'll talk about how to identify scale degrees, intervals, and Nashville numbers to play by ear so that you can play without a chord chart. We'll talk about smooth ways to modulate between keys, chord variants and inversions, advanced chords and concepts such as jazz chords, and much more. Module 1, we'll talk about fundamentals of music theory. So we'll cover how to identify notes on piano. We'll talk about the why of music, so frequencies. We'll talk about what intervals are in music theory. We'll talk about a C major scale, scale degrees, and what intervals make a scale. Talk about what chords are and our first chord, chord C. Cover half steps and whole steps and sharps and flats. So fundamentals. Module 2 will get into the Nashville number system, common and some unusual but useful chords in one key, the key of C. And the reason we're sticking in C for now is because we're going to translate this to other keys. It's going to be a system you learn in one key and then apply to any other key. We'll talk about how emotions tie to specific chords in the Nashville number system and how we use this in worship chord progressions. And this is so huge. If you start to get yourself attuned to this idea of emotion tied to specific chords, all of a sudden the amount of time that you spend learning worship music and prepping your sets will go down incredibly. It has sped up my prep time immensely. And we'll talk about common, highly useful chord substitutions for arranging and tweaking songs. Module 3 will cover chord variants and inversions. So these are common chord variants used in worship music, common chord inversions used in worship music, how these variants and inversions create unique emotions that we can use in arrangements. So again, it's not just what they are, it's how they feel and how that feeling can be it can be applied situationally so that it feels like you've just picked the perfect chord for the situation or the perfect inversion or the just in specific moments. It's very important. Module 4, we'll talk about scales, keys, and modulations. So all major scales and keys. Now we've learned a system and we're applying it to all the other keys. We'll talk about transposing and modulating between keys, additional scales such as harmonic minor and pentatonic. And then in Module 5, we'll talk about time signatures and rhythm. We'll talk about the importance of even rhythm using a metronome or click track. We'll talk about note and rest subdivisions, time signatures and how to count in 4/4, 3/4, and 6/8. Talk about adding extra beats such as compound time signatures, 3/4 plus 4/4, or 5/4 measures. We'll talk about the difference between being on the beat versus behind or ahead of the beat. And this is very important. If you can learn to identify this by ear, you'll be able to coach people and help your team gel rhythmically. And then we'll talk about how rhythm and rest create emotion, how we use it. It's not just about what we play, it's what we don't play. And then Module 6, we'll start to get into ear training. So now that we've learned this system, we're going to start to take away what you can see and try and help you start to hear it. So we'll do ear training for identifying scale degrees by ear. This is relative pitch. You don't have to have perfect pitch for this. I don't have perfect pitch. I have relative pitch. And if you can develop relative pitch, you'll be just fine. Ear training for identifying intervals in the key by ear, again, just relative pitch, is highly useful for developing the ability to hear lead parts by ear. This is the way you learn to identify lead parts by ear. Module 7, ear training with chords. So ear training for identifying Nashville numbers by ear. Again, relative pitch. This is highly useful for developing the ability to hear chords by ear, get away from chord charts, memorize much faster, and you will be so much more adaptable when you get this down. And then Module 8, we'll talk about advanced techniques. We'll start to expose you to advanced music theory concepts such as jazz chords, harmonies, Neapolitan chords, diminished and augmented chords. We'll help you develop a philosophy of music and how to learn to appreciate styles outside of your musical preferences, and the key to successful worship arrangements, and help you start to think through worship as arrangements and how you can think as an arranger to benefit your team. So that is the music theory and ear training course. So the leadership and theology course. So if you are an instrumentalist who wants to be a worship leader, or you want to be a music director, or let's say you're a worship leader, but maybe you've struggled with people skills, and maybe you're trying to get better at leading people in a biblical, loving way. That's really what this course is centered on. It's gospel focused and uses gospel theology to help lay a foundation that will help you be effective. So by the end of this course, you'll know how to become a worship leader or team member that worship teams love to work with. The early content in this course is really designed for people who are not yet worship leaders and transitions you towards thinking about that. And then the later content is for people who, okay, I'm a worship leader, I'm a music director, and to help transition you in that leadership process. We'll learn how to identify whether you're called to worship ministry. That's the first module. We'll talk about gospel-centered theology to lay the foundation for effective leadership in ministry. Talk about how to coach your team to greater quality while helping them feel valued and encouraged. I've learned over the years that you don't have to sacrifice either of those if your communication is loving and you're patient, but you also can be direct and deal with things in rehearsal in a way that still affirms people, even though you are actually coaching them and maybe asking them to do something different. There's an art to this, there's a strategy to this, and honestly, the reason that by God's grace, I ended up at the church I'm at almost 3 years at the time of recording this video, is because I came in as a guest leader and I tried to encourage people on my team. And I'm still leading worship with that team today. Many of the same people, they were kind enough to recommend me to the lead pastor, and the rest is history. This strategy really does work to make people feel valued and loved by God, even as you help them grow as and grow as a team, as you work through the musical issues that pop up when you do songs live together. So, man, I love my team. I love my church. I'm so grateful God led me where we are. So all of that to say, this is going to help you learn how to coach your team to greater quality while helping them feel valued and encouraged. And then we'll talk about how to plan awesome worship sets, how to do worship administration, job seeker tips, and more. So Module 1 is really, are you called? Are you called to lead worship, and how to tell? We'll talk about the difference between a musician and a worship leader. Well, how to answer the question, okay, what is this worship thing anyway? We'll talk about authentic worship and what it means to abide in God. We'll talk about the biblical pattern of how Jesus identifies and develops potential leaders for ministry. And this is really, really, really huge. Don't miss that. How God gifts and prepares people for ministry. And then Module 2 is going to get into the core practical gospel theology that you need to be able to know and communicate as a worship leader. This is not designed to be seminary. This is designed to be something that anybody can do and understand. But it's a rundown of the core evangelical gospel theology and how to differentiate between theological the importance of things that would be in a first tier, a second tier, and a third tier, and how we approach that differently when we're navigating relationships with other churches or other denominations. We'll talk about how the gospel impacts our life and leadership in worship ministry. And the goal of this is to expose you to the idea that as a mature leader, there are things that you prioritize in importance when it comes to theology. There are things that are worth fighting over when it comes to the humanity and divinity of Jesus, for example. When it comes to, okay, do we pass the offering or put an offering box in the back, or is it traditional or contemporary music? These are preferences. They're not even theological, and we'll get into more of that. Module 3 talks about the Holy Spirit. Talk about how the Holy Spirit plays a vital role in our leadership and worship ministry. Talk about how the fruit of the Spirit qualities change the way that we make critical leadership decisions. So as you apply the fruit of the Spirit, the qualities of the Holy Spirit that you begin to exhibit, it changes the way that you lead, and it should. And it's amazing when it does. Practical tips to implement the fruit of the Spirit in your life and leadership, and what this looks like. Module 4, we'll talk about becoming a supportive leader. So this is a module that helps you transition from a team member to a leader within your team. So the best team members that I have had over the years are the ones that were able to lead while following. They develop a sense for what great worship leadership ought to look like, and they learn how to follow another leader well, while looking for ways to support, encourage, and help that leader be effective. And that's what I'm going to help you do. And then I'll give you a 3-step communication model to help you step into a supportive leader role within your team. And then Module 5 will dig more into this communication piece. So much of worship leadership in teams lives or dies by communication. We'll talk about the core tension every leader faces between loving people well and getting the job done. We'll talk about how to avoid falling into 2 key worship leader traps or idols. And we'll talk about the importance of leading by example in leadership. We'll talk about how to lead with this 3-step communication model that is grounded in the theology we've already learned, and do it in a way that teams will love if you execute it well and you're abiding in Christ. And then tips and tricks to help your communication be loving while challenging the team to grow. Module 6 will talk about running rehearsals, how to grow a worship ministry in quality. And really the hint is it's through quality rehearsals. We'll talk about how to develop a healthy rehearsal philosophy, how to manage time and be proactive at addressing issues. Time management, my team will tell you most of the time we can rehearse 3 to 4 songs in an hour. And we're pretty consistent, maybe an hour, hour and 15 if there's some creative arranging things we want to do or I want to do, or maybe issues to work through with arrangements. But for the most part, my team is awesome. We come in and we knock it out, and you can too. And there's an art to running rehearsals in a way that lets you do what you need to do, but not waste people's time. We'll talk about how to address common issues that pop up in rehearsal, how to move your team, help them move past the music and become passionate worshipers. We'll talk about practical tips and tricks to get high quality, engaging, worshipful arrangements with your team. Module 7, we'll talk about administrating worship. So how to be efficient with your time, especially in a church staff environment. How to recruit and audition new team members, how to target and develop new leaders, how to manage your team schedules and communicate effectively, and tips and tricks to navigate budgeting, sound training, and tech issues is really an intro for someone who hasn't been exposed to this as what does it look like to lead a team. In Module 8, we'll talk about planning sets. So the reason we save this for the end is this is really a lot of to me, the most fun, interesting pieces in this entire course is set planning. And I don't want you to miss the importance of running good rehearsals and communication and administration before you get here. So we'll talk about how to pick high quality, worshipful songs your congregation will likely engage with, how to pick songs in a team environment with a recommended process that you can use, how to create sets with smooth flow and seamless transitions, the factors that you should consider every time you select songs for your church, and then tips and tricks for first-time worship job seekers, whether it's part-time or full-time. And trust me, there are a lot of churches that are in very dire need of worship leaders right now. So that is the Leadership and Theology course. So the coaching community, I'll be honest with you, this is something that many people do not take advantage of, but this is really a huge benefit of being a premium member. Essentially, I want to help invest in you personally, so you can get personalized answers to your questions as you go through the courses. You can get feedback and videos of yourself playing. You get access to me. If you post a video of yourself and you're like, okay, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? It's a way for you to get a personal touch in the midst of that. You get access to me and feedback to help you grow in your ministry. So consider becoming a premium member and accelerate your growth in worship ministry today. So do you want courses for your entire organization? What if you were able to get worship training of a very high quality for your entire church or your entire school or your entire university? your entire denomination or your state convention or your local association or whatever it might be. ZJC Worship is committed to generously help Christian organizations share the gospel of Jesus Christ through music and multiply leaders who help others worship, all to the glory of God. Find out how you can make our entire course library available to your church, your school, denomination, or missions organization for less than $2 per user per month. And frankly, when you get into the higher plans, it becomes pennies on a dollar. It becomes something where you could potentially make it available to hundreds or thousands of people for a very, very, very reduced price. So check it out. You can look at those on our website, and you can start a group plan today. Hey guys, this is Zach.
And this is Katie.
And we're excited to share that we have a new single out. It's called King of Heaven, Acoustic. It's an older song we recorded with an acoustic version. It's out on iTunes, on Spotify. We'd love if you check it out. And thank you to EJ Santos, who did the mix and the master, a whole bunch of stuff, for all his hard work. So we're really excited for you to see this, so go check it out.
Yay!
Let your glory shine, so your love will rise. We want the world to know that you bring hope and life from darkness. Let your kingdom come, so your will be done, and the earth would know that you alone bring life, the King of Heaven. Brought dead men back to life. You're the hope of generations, salvation to paupers and kings. Won the fight that we had lost. The last Adam victory brings. Forgiveness from death, poured out for all. Christ brought to life Satan's downfall. Let your glory shine, so your love will rise. We want the world to know that you bring hope and life from darkness. Let your kingdom come, so your will be done, and the earth would know that you alone bring life, the King of Heaven. For all, Christ brought to life Satan's downfall. Let your glory shine, so your love will rise. We want the world to know that you bring hope and life from darkness. Let your kingdom come, so your will be done, and the earth would know that you alone bring life, the King of Heaven. we raise our lives before your throne. We live to make your glory known. We live to bring you praise. We lift our voices and we raise our lives before your throne. We live to make your glory known.